Nothing about one-legged donkeys.
No, nothing at all.
Have you looked at that document in the past few days, Richard? Because I've been putting a fair bit into it.
I haven't, though. I've been really busy the last couple of days, so I'm with other stuff. So I will.
There can't be other stuff, Richard. I'm doing this for us. I'm doing this for the love of us, Richard. I put everything into it. The bones of my backside are going into this book, Richard. Other than that, Richard, it's fine. Goff, anything you want to say?
No, I've got no archaeological news at all. Sorry.
Okay. Why am I thinking Alan Rickman? I don't know. It's in my head. Um, okay. Let's. You know what we're going to do? We're going to get straight to sharing. Caring is sharing, as they say. We share our lives away in a maelstrom of regret. A photo set of ideas. And there, my book. And there. Oh, don't I look good? Yeah, I look really good there. Right. So what we've got today is a little bit of the Etruscans. And what we do have as well is some bits and pieces that we start with rediscoveries. So we're going to go with this, and we're going to get my notes. And I did this last night, and as I'm reading through it last night, I'm finding a lot of inaccuracies in the article that I'm going through, right? And see if you can spot the mistakes. Okay, so this is about a coin hoard that's just been published and declared on July the 31st. And the headlines are Ancient Roman Soldiers Monthly Paycheck Unearthed in Pristine Condition in the Countryside. Collection of 25 silver coins dating from 160 to AD 170 includes depictions of emperors. So as I was going through this article, I realized that when it says this is the salary of a legionary, and so obviously the last date for the coins is going to be AD 170, and this is in Norfolk. And as far as I'm aware, there weren't any Roman garrisons left in Norfolk at that stage. Um, well, any legionary garrisons at all. So that's one thing that's one thing that is not quite right about this piece. And then it says that the collection of 25 silver coins from 160 to AD 170 includes depictions of emperors. Well, there was only one Roman emperor that had sway over the empire at that time, and it was Marcus Aurelius. So, see, so one thing, the whole point of this is not only to tell you about, these coins, and I do believe that's a bust of Marcus Aurelius, not only to tell you about these coins and the discovery in the field back in 2003, but also to try, and when you do see these headlines in newspapers, to be very critical over what you're reading. And it's the reverse side of Roman coins often featured deities, various virtues, unconquered territories. So what we've got is these coins sort of give an idea of Roman civilization in Africa, the Middle East, and elsewhere. 25 silver denarii. And yeah, that would be the equivalent of a legionary's monthly wages. But this could be a hoard of coins that could be to do with anybody. And as you get through looking at these coins, you realize that in the collection of coins, supposedly dating from AD 160 to 170. There are coins here from the reign of Emperor Trajan, who actually reigned before 117, which is way before 160. And there's coins of Emperor Hadrian as well. So when you it's very problematic when people are reporting on these coins. There's also a coin in this collection from Emperor Vespasian, who would be reigning from somewhere around AD 79. So again, these coins are not from between 160 to 170. They're from a period that is a span of about 90 years. So these coins could be to do with anything. And archaeologists get very excited when we see coins like this. But it's more likely the other headline that this was connected to do with a family or an individual that lived in a very wealthy agricultural area in the Roman era. So the personifications of the Roman world, sort of including Africa, particularly that coin there. And what we've got as well, the other thing to be said about this is one of the coins not on show is a coin from Judea, which is associated with the second Jewish temple. And oddly enough, we do look at the campaign of the Romans involving the likes of Vespasian, whose coin is also found in the collection of these 25 coins from Norfolk. We look at the Jewish revolt of the late AD 60s, and we do look at the other Jewish revolt, which there's parallels on the modern day and age. So it makes what we do in archaeology, for example, with the Roman era, very relevant to the understanding of our own history today, and seeing, if not history repeating itself, if not a sense of history trying to give us answers. We do know in Norfolk, for example, lots of coins of different periods have been found, loads of Roman artifacts in East Anglia, overall, Essex, Norfolk, and so on, and Suffolk. So this very wealthy area, and finding these coins takes us to a time and a feeling of Rome. And that's what coins do for us. I remember I was writing a little bit for the book on Barry and Cadoxton today, and I mentioned a little bit about coins. So this little snapshot of information tonight is basically feeding into lots of different things that are going on at this minute, and obviously lots of little things that I'm studying myself. Now, this is very, very relevant. But again, when I initially came across this, the headline said, ancient pots found near Pompeii contain 2,500-year-old honey. But one headline said, ancient pots found at Pompeii contains honey. These pots are nothing to do with Pompeii at all. But again, to try and get headlines, people like to sort of associate anything with Pompeii, right? When we found the Roman remains outside Durham of a perfectly preserved bathhouse not so many years ago, the headlines are naturally, this is the Pompeii of the North. So it in some ways is quite sad that people who write these articles are going across headliners. And for an archaeologist like me, it's quite nice to actually look at archaeology and try to understand it in a way that makes it easier for me to present to you guys. So that pot itself is one of not two, but a number of pots that were found 70 kilometers away from Pompeii, not near Pompeii at all, at a site known as Paestum in Italy. And one of the interesting things with these pots is that when they studied them initially in the 1950s, they thought it was oil and animal fats, which was quite bizarre, to be honest with you. And I would be honest, to be blunt, finding animal fats and oils is equally as interesting as honey. But they didn't really tell us back when they initially found these in 1954 what the contents actually were. And again, nothing to do with Pompeii, but these Greek pots, 10 of them, we now know contained honey. And the two with their surviving contents, that's the story. Now, they're associated with a Greek shrine that dates back to 520 years BC. Hang on. What have I just done? There you go. 520 years BC. When I say 10 pots, 8. So these pots themselves, 8 pots, we now know the sticky residue inside them is actually honey. They suspected this in the 1980s, but they really didn't think it was honey until now. So when they initially examined the contents of these in the 1950s and 1980s, they concluded that the jars held animal and vegetable fat contaminated with pollen, insect parts, rather than honey. And the familiar story with honey is that honey itself is a substance that can last 10,000 years if it's stored properly. Whether it's edible or not is another question altogether. As we found when a group of archaeologists tasted honey in the Middle East that was actually used to store the remains of babies, which seemingly tasted like honey. But anyway, but that evidence takes us back to not 520 years BC, but a little bit sort of later, give or take 100 years. So what they've now done, they've started analysing the contents of these with various techniques. And then first of all, they thought it was beeswax. And then they started realising that the evidence inside here was actually the remains of honey. Because what they found was that the when they initially analysed the pots, the contents were very, very acidic. And then what they now realised is that all those little insect parts were actually the remains of bees, and they've now since discovered that this was honey that has a signature that it was actually from honeybees that were flying around in Greece from a strain that had come from the Middle East. So the moral of the story is to try and wait till we get the technology and to analyze contents of these types of things years later. And then when you've got the technology, you can understand that the contents of this was actually honey. And having it like a sticky substance as well, still surviving after all that time, after 2,500 years, again bears out the fact that honey can last a long time. The problem is with the honey in these jars, they had cork lids, and the cork lids had degraded and allowed in oxygen and bacteria that was slowly starting to attack the honey. So when they excavated these, the honey that was in them wasn't, the original consistency. It's starting to be attacked by oxygen and stuff. But if it's sealed in a container, like the honey that was found in Tutankhamun's tomb, dating back to 3,500 years, that was extremely preserved. And apparently, it was edible. Probably like Maluka honey. I don't know I'm lucky enough to have a pot of Maluka honey here, but I'm unlucky enough not to be able to eat it because it's actually medicine for my sheep. I don't know if any of you had Maluka honey. It's like really thick black stuff, and the stuff that I've got is really expensive from New Zealand, and cost me 25 quid for a small pot. But but it's very thick and tarry, and I can imagine that the contents of these jars would be like that, like Maluka honey, which the Maluka honey I've got is like a bit of a weird sort of tang to it. Anyway, if any of you have experienced that, my sheep's hooves have experienced it. So okay, so what I'm going to do now is I last night what we did we we looked at the we looked at the first Jewish rebellion, the first Jewish revolt, and I thought that sort of ties us in with how the Jews have actually been in history and how things have panned out, and it sort of links us in with when we've looked at the Phoenicians and when we've looked at the Carthaginians, and when we've looked at other cultures in the Mediterranean, and hopefully we'll be able to have a little look at the Etruscans tonight. And I can imagine tonight's going to be a lot shorter because we don't have the other discussion that we usually have with everybody else, including Anne. So the first Jewish-Roman war, there's Masada. It's not all about the eventual capture of the last rebels at Masada. It's actually a war of interesting flags, false flags. So what we've got these coins and stuff, and we've got that Palestine. Oh yeah, Gaza. Is it all familiar? Yeah. So this is why it's really sort of relevant to today, really. Masada. And I just wanted to sort of make this really relevant. So back to the article on the coins, which are these coins here. One of the to be Roman emperors associated with these coins is Vespasian. Vespasian would eventually become Roman emperor in AD, in the year AD 79. So, but at this stage, between 66 and AD 74, Vespasian is a general, if not a governor. And I'm going to make no bones about it. I've righted my wrongs. I'm no longer using the word CE, Common Era. I'm starting to use AD again. And if you've noticed, I'm not using before the Common Era. I use before Christ. And it's basically my response to us being slowly becoming less Christianized in this country, which is dangerous. So I'm doing AD and BC now. So yeah. So when you see CE, I change it to AD. That explained. So what we've got here, we've got a little bit of a map and this sort of undertaking the first Jewish-Roman war. There were 3 Jewish wars. This is known as the Great Jewish Revolt. The first Jewish revolt, or the War of Destruction, or the Jewish War, depending on who you were. And when you look at the history, the Romans were sort of in control of this area, right? And you sort of get King Harold, and 30 years earlier, or so, a little bit before that, you've got the likes of Jesus Christ and so on. But now we're into a period when the Jews are sort of pseudo-autonomous, right? And the Romans give them a little bit of sort of sense of identity, a bit like the piddle pot of Wales, where we've got the Senedd, which has got no real powers, but we feel ourselves independent. We're not an independent country. But this is what the Romans did to the Jews. They made the Jews feel independent. They made them feel empowered, but they weren't. when the Jews across this landscape started to get very sort of, we are an independent people, we are this and that. And the Romans said, actually, no, you're not. Right. So this is what's going on. And this is also the period when the great temple at Jerusalem is set alight. Right. So there it is on the text there, led to the destruction of the temple, the great temple in Jerusalem. And then basically you've got the Jews themselves, in complete uproar for a period between 66 and AD 74, because that's when Masada was besieged. It's not on here. So what you got the names of Gallus, Vespasian, Titus, who would eventually become an emperor, Silva, and obviously you've got these sieges. Masada is the most famous of these sieges. Now, when you look at this, it's quite influential for the next, basically, okay, you could say the next 2,000 years, because everything that's born out now is being played out today. So this is why it makes this very, very relevant. Understanding this allows you to understand what's going on today, right? And one thing that can be said is that with all the leaders leading the armies and fighting against the Jews, the list of Roman generals and governors, everyone survives. But every single one of the Jewish rebels ends up dead. I think other than one on the list, and that's a list of 20. So it's quite a severe conflict. It's quite something that is the diaspora, the dispersal of the Jewish people from this landscape. The total Roman army in the reign of Titus, and Titus becomes emperor because he's basically the next in throne from Nero. And he was actually the emperor when all this sort of kicks off. The army of Titus is 50,000 strong. And the destruction, according to the Roman historian Josephus, tells us that 1.1 million Jews died in this conflict. And, it's a significant part of Judea's population. 1/4 of the entire population of this landscape, 1/4, 4 million or so, are killed. And we're looking at possibly about 100,000 of them enslaved as well. So this is the whole thing about this is it had been an independent landscape before the birth of Christ. And then basically when the Romans came in, they said, look, Jews, we want to, we want you to continue worshiping your God. And, we want you trading with us, but you're technically under Roman rule. But they allowed them a certain level of independence with their synagogues and everything. And when you read the stories about Jesus, and we talk about AD 30 or thereabout, what you get is like all these rabbis and the synagogues and a certain amount of control by the Jewish people, but you've got Roman soldiers. So the Roman soldiers technically keeping the peace. And when you watch the film Life of Brian, right, I know it's a parody, right, but there's a lot of truth in what Life of Brian is about. For example, one of the when they talk about Biggest Dickus and they talk about all these wonderful things in Life of Brian, one of the Jewish leaders is actually An Anus, and there's two of them, two An Anuses. So you can just get an idea why when they're taking the pee out of this landscape, right? You got names like that. and there's one that is actually quite racist here, which I'm not going to do. But so you can imagine, and basically when you got Life of Brian, they talk about these Roman soldiers and the rabbis and the synagogues and the power of the Jews and the power of the Romans. It's all what this state was about up until the Jewish War of AD 66. So yeah, there was a false flag event, right? You can't make this up. So when you look at sort of history, most wars, most of the most terriblest wars start off with false flags. Second World War, the Germans sort of make out that the Polish have invaded Germany, and on the 1st of September, Germany invades. First World War, you get Princip in the First World War and the Black Hand, and it's all a setup to bring all these countries into a massive war. Everybody falls for it. And the false flag here in AD 66 is that in the reign of Nero, a Greek sacrifices a bird at the entrance of the Caesarea synagogue. This leads to this rebellion. A killing of a bird on the steps of a synagogue leads to the death of over 1 million people. You cannot make it up, right? So there's tensions escalated. The governor Florus looted the temple treasury and massacred Jerusalem's residents, sparking an uprising in which rebels killed the Roman garrison while pro-Roman officials fled. So in other words, this is the start of everything. The Roman, because of the death of one single bird, right? Again, this sounds like something out of Life of Brian, but it's not. This leads to a bloody outbreak of warfare and death. And there's a provisional government led to Annas, or Ananus, Ben Ananus, or Annas. And then this is the guy who's the governor, right? Again, you can't make these names up. The pronunciation is actually the expletive way rather than me struggling to make it something else. So there's a Jewish state, there's this Jewish state, right? And again, this takes us back to 1947 when there's a Jewish uprising against British rule, and they kick the Brits out, and it's a Jewish state in 1947. So again, this directly links us with us and our timeline. Vespasian, General Vespasian. General Vespasian's in Britain, right? Years earlier, right? General Vespasian is in Britain, right? In AD 43, and then he turns up over 20 years later in Jerusalem. Again, Vespasian does become emperor eventually in AD 79. So this basically suppresses this landscape. And there's brutal repercussions, absolute brutal repercussions for the nature of everything that is actually going on. Now, so again, what we've got is Nero, Emperor Nero, dies, is poisoned in AD 68, right? And his successor is going to be Galba, right? And obviously, one of his other successors is going to be Vespasian and Titus. But anyway, the point is, with all of this, is now whoever is now in charge of Rome, which is Galba, is going to need to try and sort out this rebellion. Again, in history, right? When you get a war which is ongoing, and then somebody takes over, right, after the death of Nero in AD 68, and you've got Galba, right, who's his successor, Galba wants to send in the army. You know, he wants to deal with this this uprising once and for all. But Galba's not successful because the war goes on until AD 74. And do you know what, guys? Can you see a similarity in modern day history? You can. Um, United States president. He's going to sort out the border dispute in Ukraine, and he's going to sort out what's going on in the likes of Israel, right? And he doesn't sort her out, right? But the first thing he wants to do is sort these things out, and this is exactly what's happening. The Romans cannot have this going on their doorstep. It just cannot happen on their doorstep. So what basically happens is the Holy of Holies. What happens is Titus, this general, who again eventually becomes emperor, Titus decides to set light to the temple. A few years earlier, the temple treasure had been looted, but the temple hadn't been set alight. So the temple itself of Jerusalem was set aflame, right? The huge Jewish temple, huge synagogue with all Jewish wonders in it, including the Ark of the Covenant, but the Holy of Holies. But that's something else. But the fact of the matter is, by destroying this temple in AD 79, right, you could basically say that leads to all the history and all the traumas that the Jewish people have suffered ever since. The temple is set alight, and what you've got there is the Wailing Wall, which is the wall that's left of the temple of Jerusalem. I remember my dad, he used to tell me that when he went to the Wailing Wall, he put a little bit of a note in there saying Gary from Barry, right? So it's still there probably somewhere. But anyway, right, so people put little notes in the wall, you know, and so on. But anyway, the point is that Titus, on the Arch of Titus, when Titus becomes an emperor, right? On the Arch of Titus, basically, it is basically, you know, Titus saying, actually, before I become emperor, I looted and destroyed and burnt the Jewish temple. And it was me who was responsible for the destruction of the Jewish state. But unfortunately, right, as you can see with the date line, right, there you go. There's Titus, right. We've still got a couple more years to go, right. So you know we've still got Masada, which is AD 74. You know, so Titus didn't actually complete the job. He really didn't complete the job. So Masada is this sort of this thing, this horror that perpetuates the background of the history within this landscape, which has had profound consequences on this modern day and age. So one thing I would say is that I don't know if you've ever heard of the archaeologist Dorothy Garrod. Now, Dorothy Garrod was she was a friend of T.E. Lawrence, and as you know, Lawrence of Arabia was basically responsible for the downfall of the Ottoman Empire by 1917, right? But Dorothy Garrod was wandering around on a camel around the deserts, and if she had been captured, well, we don't want to talk about what would have happened to her, but Dorothy, they did a film about Dorothy Garrod. Now, Dorothy Garrod was an exploring officer, and she knew all of this history that happened with the Jews. She knew about Masada. She knew about Jerusalem and Judea, Galilee, Jesus Christ. She knew all that, right? But when she knew the landscape better than anybody. So in about 1920, Winston Churchill, who was Lord of the Admiralty, met Dorothy Garrod in Cairo, and he basically said, well, you know this landscape, don't you? Can you draw up some maps? And those maps will be the borders of Jordan. They will be the borders of Palestine. They will be the borders of Syria, and they will be the borders of the likes of Iraq, and so on and so on. So it's because of an archaeologist that drew the borders of of most of the countries that are in this area of the Middle East today, right? And lots of people say she got it wrong, but that's life. But again, all of this sort of fits in nicely with the sense of sort of history. So that is a cache of slingshots. We got lots of caches of tens of thousands of slingshots of at Masada. And I didn't want to do a Masada lecture today. It's just sort of a little bit of an introduction on this on this war. So the war had profound consequences for the Jewish people, with many killed, displaced, or sold into slavery. Um, and this one thing about the temple and Masada and Jewish history, and then the second Jewish rebellion, which was the Bar Kokhba revolt, which was absolutely terrible for the Jewish people. But one thing, if we these are coins that are actually found at Masada, right? And Masada itself is that sort of we'll give a few facts and figures on Masada, but these are coins found at Masada. Now, even though Masada is massively important to this history, right, and Jewish people and the Middle East and the archaeology and the Romans and so on and so on, right? You can see a little bit of sort of a maple-like leaf there, and there's Hebrew writing on these, and these are sort of bronze Jewish coins. And again, these are found at Masada. And obviously, this is the Titus. This is on the Titus Victory Arch. And you could say that this is the siege of Masada, but probably not like this at all. However, one thing that should be said is surrounding Masada were numbers of Roman camps. They built a wall around it, so nobody could get in and nobody could get out. The Romans were petrified of the fact that they might be caught out like the destruction of the garrison at Jerusalem. So we do actually have a Roman historian known as Flavius Josephus. Now, Flavius Josephus is actually writing at the time that this occurred, which is quite unusual because most Roman historians are writing 50 or 100 years later. So we got Flavius Josephus who's writing about this, and he was gone and done and dusted by AD 100. So he wrote this history in his lifetime. It's probably had first-hand accounts of the siege of Masada. And what we've got is the reason the Romans were here at Masada is because they were besieging the last of the rebels, the Jewish rebels. And they were Jewish Sicarii, and these Jewish Sicarii were the most holiest, most dedicated Jewish combatants that were about. Right, and when the Romans originally besieged this, they thought that there was tens of thousands of Jews there, and oh wow, they're gonna capture, this Masada, right? You can imagine, building a tower like that. This is a sort of there were various ramps built, and they took months and months and months to build these ramps, right? How much of that could actually be real, and what happened is something else. And this siege probably lasted 6 months. So from late AD 73 to the earlier months of AD 74. So this whole thing, and it was led by Elijah ben Jahia. And when you got a certain Ben Hur, yeah, Ben is a very popular name amongst the Jewish faith. Ben, Elijah ben Jehia. And this guy, who was thought to lead thousands and thousands of Jewish rebels, when the Romans actually captured this, they worked out that there was only less than 1,000 Jews here. Lots of children, lots of women, lots of old men. These weren't all warriors. And it's very very important to remember that there's a great myth associated with Masada, and that should sort of be unlocked. So when they and it's also it's it's also quite fraught with problems, because when you, in the archaeology and the archaeology tells us that that out of the 967 combatants and non-combatants, children and grandparents and whatever, women, out of the 967, only 7 people lived, because what happened? They basically poisoned themselves instead of fighting the Romans. Most of them poisoned themselves. So there were 7 people left alive, and they happened to be 2 women and 5 children. The tragedy is this is something ingrained in the Jewish mindset, and what I'm going to do is talk about the last Jewish war as well, to sort of give you more context as well. So this governor, this general, Lucius Flavius Silva, besieged this rock at Masada with approximately 10,000 soldiers. Again, it's 10 to 1, isn't it? In Roman favor. And this was the legion. This was the 10th legion of the Fretensis. This was the Fretensis Legion. Now, one of the things you would think is that the Jews learnt their lesson, right? It's not worth taking on Rome. Unfortunately, they didn't learn their lesson, and to be talking about this, to sort of allow us to understand, to allow us to understand really what's going on, is that then there was another Jewish war, right? The second Jewish war. There was going to be a third Jewish war, and it's sort of all mixed up. But this war itself is the most devastating for the landscape and the people. And there it is, of Judea. So it gives you an idea. There's Judea on the map. And this was known as the Bar Kokhba War. Some say this was actually the second revolt, and or this was the last revolt, but there were 3 revolts altogether. If you want to read into that, that's fine. But there were 3 rebellions. And Bar Kokhba was actually Simon Bar Kokhba. And basically what he said, right, we're gonna create an independent Jewish state. And again, when you look at modern history, it's that fear of the Jewish people. They establish a homeland, and it's going to be taken away from them. There you go. I know this is sort of intimated with sort of sort of political stuff today, but it's trying to explain what is going on today and how the Roman world thought and what the archaeology tells us. Because what we do see in the archaeology is we do see a lot in the archaeological record of destruction of Jewish settlements and destruction of Jewish villages, and what we do see is mass killings and mass burials of the people of Judea. And basically what the Romans did, they to stop the Jews ever doing this again after the revolt, which was between 132 and 136. It lasted 4 years. What the Romans did was to basically remove everybody from Judea. to enslave them, to kill them, to displace them. People were just kicked out of Judea for good. They were just removed. They were expunged from history, so that the Romans would not have to deal with the Jews ever again. The Jews were going to be wiped out for good, right? Can you just hear what I've just said? And a certain person said that in the 1930s. Um, so what we do see is these are the shocking figures, right? So obviously, it's going to be guerrilla warfare. It's going to be underground hideouts. They're very prepared for this. They wish to create a new state. But what the Romans do, they throw everything at it. They throw the kitchen sink, right? They even chuck Anne in there, right? They check everything that they can in there. In fact, the Romans send in half of their entire military force in the Roman Empire to deal with this landscape, right? And again, that is so important. I say that because we see time and time again the Romans, when they're up against it, right, they check everything at it, right? Hopefully they will win. The Romans eventually did this against the Persians, right? In the 350s, I think it was, and they lost. And the Romans never did it again because they lost most of their military, right? But this time is way before, and Simon Bar Kokhba died, got killed. Lots of his acolytes got killed. And actually, in this campaign, right, this was in the reign of no less than Emperor Hadrian himself. Emperor Hadrian was directly involved in this, in the campaign there. He was on the bloody ground, yeah. He was there. And basically, he took with him, right, 12 Roman legions. I kid you not, right? He took the 3rd Legion of Caesarea, the 10th Fretensis Legion. We're back again. Those were the ones involved in the earlier Jewish war. Yeah, but they were basically wiped out nearly this time, right? There was the Gallica Regiment from France, right? There's the Ferrata Regiment. There's the Dotaria Regiment. There's a regiment named after Trajan himself. The Gemina Regiment, a regiment, a legion from Macedonia, one named after Claudia, the Fulmita Regiment, and the Flavia Felix Regiment. And also, listen to this, right? The Legion of the Hispana were here. And the Legion of the Hispana were actually the 9th Hispanic Legion. The Legion of the 9th. And lots of historians tell us that the Legion of the 9th disappeared in Scotland. They didn't. They disappeared here. The Romans were so gutted that they nearly lost 3 entire legions. They didn't stop. They kept putting legions into this area. So Hadrian said, this isn't going to happen on my watch. And the death rate amongst the Jews, those actually killed in battle, right? Those actually killed fighting in the streets, in the towns, right? Nearly lost 600,000 Jews died in this war, right? 2, obviously, 3 Roman legions completely wiped out. 1 Roman legion, the Legion of the 22nd Dotariana region, that was completely destroyed, right? The 9th Hispana Legion disappeared. It was completely gone, wiped out. So the Romans, and also most of the Fretensis Legion, the 10th Fretensis Legion, from the war there, from the earlier first Jewish war, right? They were nearly completely wiped out. So what's basically happened is that Hadrian's not going to allow, anything to happen. And what we've got is the archaeological evidence we find. I'll just mention a little bit about the archaeological evidence. So what I should do, right? There's actually if we go to a bit I tell you what, the Wikipedia entry is actually pretty good. The images on it are pretty good. So let's just go to the Wikipedia. So BAR and Cobber Revolt, right? And what we've got there we go. The images are pretty good. And so what we've got there is that there's a detail of Simon. You know, this is that great Jewish rebel, right? And get rid of that. No. And the images on here are as follows. It gives a bit of an archaeology trail. So we'll just mention the archaeology now. So where is it? Go down here. There's a cat trying to get in my lap. Right, here we go. Hang on a minute. Where is all this? Right. There's some good images on here. I'm just trying to get them a minute. Just scrolling down. Up, 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 up there. No. 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 There. Here we go. So what we've got, archaeologists have excavated the Jewish stuff, right? And right, that's one of the sites. And so what we've got here is, let's just talk about the archaeology. So the archaeologists have found evidence of this thing. So this is a site known as Horvat Ethri. And the archaeological excavations across Judea have revealed widespread destruction layers. You know, I mentioned Judea was just expunged of people, and that was it. It's not just written in history, right? It's actually in the archaeology. There's a destruction layer across the archaeology, which is great. Abandonment deposits, destruction layers. This was not just in history. This is in the archaeological record. So, we hear about the Jews being removed from Judea. We hear it in writing, but this excavation at this site, the archaeologists say, pointing to the near total destruction of the Jewish settlements in the region. So when they excavate these sites, there's a layer of gone. It's gone. These layers have been found in both above ground structures and underground installations. So in other words, you know what I mentioned earlier on, the Simon's rebellion, the Jews were waiting underground and stuff. So the Romans just basically went in there. They found all the hiding complexes underground, the burial caves underground, the catacombs, storage facilities. They burnt them out. They raped and destroyed everything that they had. The Romans. So the Romans' policy here was exactly what the American army did when they were going through the specific islands, right? When they would go into the cave systems and they would get rid of the Japanese. This is exactly what happened. So what we've got is Judea. While the evidence is strongest in Judea, additional, though limited, signs of destruction and abandonment have been identified in Jordan and Galilee as well. So this whole thing, you know, this whole landscape of archaeology, you know, they've excavated all these different villages, and it's saying, right, that the landscape was only reoccupied in Judea 130 years later. Non-Jewish populations moved into the landscape 130 years later because the Jewish population had been wiped out. You know, they've got sort of modern areas where they're looking at, and again at this site, Horvat Ethri, they found a mass grave was discovered, and the mass grave was in a Jewish ritual bath, and they found that amongst others showing signs of dying in battle, one person had been beheaded by a sword, which they actually found in this Jewish ritual bath, which was a mass grave. So it's not just talking about it. There's another site called Herodium, And at Herodium, archaeologists excavated in the 1980s complex tunnels connecting very early systems. And they found out that these basic underground cistern tunnels showed evidence of destruction and showed evidence that the Jews had been using an underground system of resistance under this Roman onslaught. And apparently they're saying at Herodium, when the Romans were besieging Herodium, the Jews managed to get out of the cistern systems and sort of come up behind the Romans. But the Romans soon got wise to this, and they decided to destroy everything from above and destroy everything from below. So we've got lots of evidence of sieges, and we've got concentrations of slingshots and all these other things associated with these sites. Now, and we've got evidence of Roman camps, and we've got evidence of Roman slingshot mounds associated with sieges and so on across the Judean landscape. Now, one image here, if it's going to come up, well, there you go. This is one of the hiding complexes dating from this very event, the Simon Bar Kokhba rebellion, right? Revolt. So this is actually one of those systems. And I got to be honest with you, right? What's going on in Palestine at this minute is the reverse of this, where there's underground systems used by a certain terrorist organization I can't mention on YouTube because I'll lose my license. But the fact of the matter is, it's almost as if history is repeating itself in another way. It's really, really weird stuff. You know, history, we don't learn from history. It just keeps repeating itself over and over again. So again, Roman historians wrote about these underground systems, you know, in Cassius Dio's writings, right? Who's going to be writing not so far away from these events and sort of that sort of timeline, and the timeline again, 132 to 136. And so when this is happening, and what they've done, right, this is going to surprise us, right? They found 130 of these sites in Jerusalem, not Jerusalem, Judea, right? 130 of these underground sites, absolutely amazing. 130. It's unbelievable that that this is what's going on. And what happens towards the end of the revolt, right? The final phase of the revolt is that instead of holding, soldiers down these things, the final phase of the Bar Kokhba revolt, many Jewish rebels and civilians sought refuge in natural caves. More than 30 such caves have been identified, extending geographically across the Judean landscape, up into the Judean mountains. Excavations have uncovered a wide range of materials well preserved due to the dry climate of the area, including written records that shed light on the revolt, as well as the period's language, culture, and legal practices. Personal belongings such as property deeds, statues of Lloyd George, household keys, luxury items, pottery, textiles, glassware, wooden artifacts, leather sandals, food remains, all about daily life with these people trying to cope with the terrible conditions that are going on. And cave systems like this, it's almost like the Dead Sea Scroll type stuff. So the Cave of Letters, where several documents of the period, including letters from Simon Bar Kokhba, who was actually the man who was leading a revolt. We've got letters of the very man who was leading this revolt against the Romans, which is absolutely amazing. So there's canyon within the Dead Sea area, and what they're saying is that they've not only that we've got a cave of letters, right? There's also a cave of horrors. And the Cave of Horrors is where they found a dozen human skeletons within, very similar cave to this, including children and infants, some of whose remains still preserve traces of hair, skin, and tendons. The cave also yielded Bar Kokhba revolt coinage. And obviously, this is all about the times and terrible situation that these people were involved in. And what they've got legal documents associated with this revolt, written from the Jewish point of view, not just the Roman point of view, the Jewish point of view. And so what we've in one location, we've got a cache of 35 legal documents, including marriage contracts, property deeds, and guardianship papers. And basically, these papers were found belonging to a particular one person known as Barbatha, who was a woman, who just basically died in the cave. She died from starvation. And there's also the Cave of the Swords as well. And you know why it's called Cave of the Swords? Because, and oh my God, can you remember this, Goff? This was in the news. They found a cave with swords in. This was in 2023. Archaeologists uncovered a hidden cache of Roman weaponry, including 4 iron swords, and 3 of them still preserved in their scabbards. And it's likely that these are being taken from the Romans in the first revolt, roughly around AD 70, and they'd been hidden in the cave, and they never went back for them. And they found, interesting enough, in one cave they actually found 24 coins, also found in 2023. Coins from Britain, coins from modern day Romania, also Yugoslavia. And they found these in another cave, and these most were discovered near a Roman legionary and auxiliary camp, and may have been brought by Roman soldiers. They may have been taken by Jews and hidden in the cave. It's really, really difficult to say. So I wanted to give you that there, to sort of give you an idea about history and how things repeat themselves. And after that, we'll mention something about Cumbria, and then we will possibly end. So I think we'll probably be going for a finish today, probably about 9 o'clock. So because we're not waiting for many people tonight, we'll probably have a 7-minute break until at 8:20. But is there anything that anyone wants to say? Anything? Am I going too heavy on the political stuff, or is that okay? It doesn't matter now because we won't be doing any more of that. But what I was trying to do is just say that history repeats itself. We don't learn from it, we just don't. It's crap.
I was going to, it's quite ironic, isn't it, that at that time the Jews were doing a lot in their caves and tunnels and things, and in Palestine or in Gaza now, it's the other way around, where the terrorist groups are there in the tunnels and the Jews are trying to smoke them out. So, like you say, it's things don't change, do they?
And when you look into the history, you just think that this is just like, shouldn't these people know better? And it's just like, yeah. Yeah, and you can see what's pumping in to the mindsets of people in the Middle East. This is our homeland. This is us. Blah blah blah, and it's like this constant thing. And you can then see that the one thing, when you see the Jewish people removed from Judea, all the cave stuff, and that's exactly as you've just said what's happening in Gaza. Without repeating what you've just said that I have. But it's just shocking.
Yeah.
Right. Anything you want to say, Richard, before we have a break?
No, not for me.
My missus bought me this massive long cake, right? She dumped it here. I started shaking chunks of it, and she grabbed it and she said, "Why didn't you eat it all?" Right. So I've still got it here, so I've still got to eat it, right? So I'm gonna have a bit of cake now, and we'll be back looking at the Etruscans, but we'll look at something else. We'll be back in like 5 minutes. I'll see you then.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Where's my thingy gone? I don't like it when I lose my thingy, Bob. Richard, do you mind getting down to your undies in the next week or so and meeting me at the studio with your laptop and my laptop? He's not talking to me now, because I talked about his underwear, Goff.
Yeah, I think he's muted or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Right.
back on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could do something now after.
Yeah.
I'll have to get everything on my. I don't know. I've got quite a bit on my. Most of my stuff's on my PC, not my laptop.
No, it's more of going through the bits in red. And what's happened to the mystery of the Romilly family in the document, I don't know. But what happened to the Barry Romilly family, which, as we know, arrived in Barry in 1444? But that's life. It's still up on the council website, Richard.
Yeah.
How does 1812 become 1444? Do you know what I mean? Oh, and
Pretty good, isn't it?
I saw another real stinker the other day. It said like I don't know, I can't remember what it was. Something like Saint Barak was the saint in Barry um in the 1800s or something. He came to Barry, and I just thought, hang on, somebody's done something wrong here. Right. Anyway, so what we're going to do now, I want us to just basically mention something sort of pseudo silly, but we need to lighten the load. I got my cup of tea in front of me. Anne hasn't told me where she is tonight, which is a bit of a shame. What me and Anna thought, we're going to go around Goff's place, and Goff, can you imagine going to a play with Anne? Yeah, it would make me cough as well. Right, okay, right. Basically, I just wanted to mention this was sort of more relevant on Tuesday than it is tonight, but because we've got like 5 people in Cumbria in our Cumbria class, this is a site known as Ambleside, and the one thing with Ambleside, it's one of those Roman forts that they've got excavations there, and they're open to the public, and they've done a really bad job of how they display the history and archaeology. But they've had a really good open day recently, and they've got a tent with finds in and stuff. And the point I was making was that one of the members on the Tuesday said that she went there and they had a little bit of a talk and stuff. And the archaeologists working here in the 1920s with a guy by the name of Collingwood at Ambleside, which is in Cumbria, which is basically south of Carlisle, a bit north of Preston, that type of area. Anyway, I've been there. It's by the lakes, and they were saying that when Collingwood excavated, when they went to display the archaeology, they displayed it in a different way. And I can remember saying, actually, they did the same at Killeen. So what they did, they excavated the barrack they excavated I think 2 sets of barracks at Killeen, and then they covered up the archaeology, put a membrane on it, and used the stones to sort of reconstruct what is actually below the surface. And that's what they did at Ambleside. But they didn't do a real good job at Ambleside, and it doesn't look very good. And then basically one of our regulars, she said that they found they've got an inscribed stone there, and we've had the library of our Roman books and stuff move from Cumbria down to us. So they're in our studio in Barry now. So we're trying to sort all that out. And then she mentioned about a stone that they found at Ambleside, and she wanted to have details of it. And I got this book out, and I just thought, here are the details in the book, which I'm going to read out now. So that's what I found, and another little bit of a Roman thing. So what I did, I looked in the book, took a photograph in the break, and back in the 1960s, 1962, they found a tombstone, which was in somebody's garden in 1840. Basically, and then there was another tombstone as well that was found in 1945. but that tombstone disappeared, and we don't know what happened to it. Anyway, they were talking about this stone, and I was looking at this and thinking, um, is that actually a real Roman stone? You know, is that actually really a Roman stone? And I was thinking about this because I visited a stone in West Wales really recently. But whether it's genuine or not, there's a nice little story about this, and it basically says, "To the shades of the dead and of good memory," and you can see the word where is the word? There's a word memory on there somewhere. Oh yeah, a memoriam, right? So a memoriam. Where's a memoriam on there? There should be on there somewhere. Anyway, there's a word a memoriam. Anyway, it goes to say, good memory, Flavius Flucinus, retired former centurion, lived 55 years. They put loads of detail on these gravestones. The shadow of the dead and of good memory, Flavius Romanus, lived for 35 years. And there's another interesting thing on this tombstone, right? They didn't really know that there was any fighting around the fort at Ambleside. Well, on this tombstone, they realized Romanus, Flavius Romanus, who died at 35, was killed in the fort by enemies. And I thought that was a really interesting little thing, that they've got a stone there with all those details on that, and that can tell us so much history. But there's with all the stones that have actually been found on the site, unfortunately they don't have the name of the fortress, which is quite disconcerting, because Roman historians, in something called the Antonine Itinerary, tell us that the site at Ambleside was known as Galava, but they haven't actually found any inscriptions at Ambleside, which has actually got the name Galava on. And it might not be this fort, it might be another locality, but we don't know. Another little bit of a story, a little bit of a pickup story before we go on to the Etruscans, is that I used to, as you do, Goff, I used to be involved with a woman who lived in Cumbria. And when we were going around the Roman site this one day, known as Old Carlisle, with our son in the pushchair, right? She said, I found a stone with carvings on it, yeah. And I thought, what? I went over and she'd actually found a stone with Roman carving on it, and that stone at Old Carlisle was the first stone carved, a stone with carving on it that had been found there in 100 years, and she had actually found it. And unfortunately, as things happen, Goff, we split up, and she kept the stone, Goff, with the carvings on it. I knew I should have kept hold of the stone, um, but it didn't work out that way. So I've still got to do a report on that. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at the Etruscans now. Goff, the moral of the story is, don't get involved with women who keep your stones.
Oh.
Yeah, I thought it was funny anyway. It's been decided by Tuesday, Goff, that I do a separate talk in the near future on the Etruscans, right? I do a talk on their carved tombs underground, which is a talk that I've given before, but they sort of said, oh, we want it again. So I thought, okay. So the reason why we're mentioning Etruscans tonight is that the Etruscans, otherwise known as the Ravenna people, right? The Etruscans, the people of Tuscany that gave the name to Tuscany. There you go. These Etruscans were those people that were not warlike like the Romans. They created a world, and in many ways, the Etruscans created the Roman state, right? But the Romans don't admit to this, because the Etruscans were peace-loving people. They were traders like the Phoenicians, right? They weren't great conquerors like the Romans. They spread the word like the Phoenicians. And what it is, the Etruscans set little cities up around their area, right? Like Perusia, like Arretium, like Velch. They set up these sort of areas, right? City states. Basically, the Etruscans had a common language. They had a common culture, a common currency. They all worked together, and they called themselves Etruscans, right? And there's some similarities to do with Central American people as well. At the time of the Zapotecs, the Olmecs, and the Toltecs, which is sort of middle, well, sort of earlier, sort of middle Central American civilization, well before the likes of the Maya, they were fairly peaceful as well, and they lived in sort of city states, and that's in Central America, like sort of the Etruscans. So even though they sort of dominated this part of Italy, right, they weren't, like the Romans. And when I say that they probably created Rome, it's probably the Romulus and Remus myth comes from the Etruscans, but the Romans don't want to admit that. They want to say that they created it, right? And Rome itself is, as you can see, on the green area, where at one stage the Etruscans were very sort of influential, right? But then slowly but surely the Etruscans sort of went back into this sort of deep green area. So what we can sort of say is that these people, even though they were sort of city-state based, right, a bit like the Phoenicians, very much like the Phoenicians, very much like the Phoenicians, that he didn't go out raping and pillaging and killing everybody. And they actually had coinage, probably some of the earliest tradable coinage anywhere in the Mediterranean, somewhere around the 450s, 450 BC. So somewhere like that. So they had coinage, they had trading coinage. And so what we've got, the one thing about the Etruscans, even though the Romans tried to wipe the Etruscans off the face of the earth, they've tell us a lot about themselves because they've left lots of carvings, and they leave a lot in the way of beautiful bronzes, beautiful ironwork, beautiful temples underground. Now the temples and buildings and houses above ground were destroyed by the Romans, but because they buried their dead underground, in the way they lived, i.e., they built temples underground, which were exactly like the temples above ground. They built houses underground, which were like the houses above ground, in the hypogeums and the necropolises underground. The Romans couldn't destroy that, and they didn't. And all this stuff underground remained, right? So as Rome is expanding, nicking the Etruscan territory, they are creating a history underground that will remain to tell us about these people, right? It's almost as if, actually, Goff, I think what I'm trying to say is that the Romans did the same to the Etruscans that they did to the Jews. The difference is that the sense of being an Etruscan was wiped off the face of the earth for good. But they didn't do that with the Jews, because lots of Jews managed to get out in time. The Etruscans didn't. So sort of the balance of power, so what we've got, they extended, all the way up to the Alps, all the rest, and sort of created these sort of legal cities. And Livy, the Roman historian, tells us that fondly about the Etruscans, right? Roman historian now, not the Etruscans. Livy tells us, and basically Livy then says that the slowly but surely the Etruscans got smaller and smaller, and the reduction in Etruscan territory was gradual. But after 500 years BC, the political balance of power in the Italian peninsula shifted away from the Etruscans in favor of those damnable, horrible, vicious, murdering, raping Romans, if that's a fair thing to say. So let's have a little look at some images, and I'll probably be finished a little bit before the likes of 9 today, but that's probably good for all of us. But just want to say that what we've got is that in a way, these people refer to themselves as it's quite strange, really, the community of the people, or the boundary of the people. They're the community of the people, the community of these independent states across the area of Tuscany. So this is how they saw themselves. They saw themselves as as a community of people, a community of cities. And this is sort of where we go with a sense of their who they are. This is a boundary stone. This is basically a stone saying, "We are the people. We are the world." Well, they were, this is the community of the people. This is the boundary stone of the people. This is what they're saying, and we are the people of the Rosanna, or later on we call them the Etruscans. Well, within this world, within the Etruscan world, what we do know is that they were very much linked with other worlds, like the Phoenicians and very much like the Greeks. The Greeks would have been very aware of the Etruscans. They would have traded with the Etruscans. They would have probably preferred to trade with the Etruscans. And we see that the Etruscans were aware of Greek legends like the Homeric sort of stories, and basically going back to Troy and all the rest of it. So they were sort of linked in with all of this. This is rather interesting because it sort of screws with your mind because basically in the sort of height of the Etruscans, about 700 years BC, they buried their cremated loved ones before they started creating these hypogeums underground, and the network of sort of structures underground, which I'll go on to Google before we finish tonight. When before they actually buried their loved ones, inhumations rather than cremating them. Before that, what they did, they had cremation urns in the shape of the houses that the people lived in. Can you get that? Yeah. So it's a bit like what we do today. So it's like my when my sister died in 2005, my parents created a shrine at the Barry Cemetery, which they would do, and basically, there's a photograph of my sister there, and there's like little things, little knickknacks there and stuff at the Barry Cemetery. You'll notice my sister's grave, and it's a bit like what the Etruscans did. They wanted something familiar, so they would put their cremations in an urn that looked like their house. Now that then developed in a house underground, which was a lot more sort of classical, like the house that they lived in above ground. So what we've got, little things like this, a little bit of gold Etruscan art, little bit earlier than the more advanced stuff that we're going to look at. Nice representation of the swastika there. The irony is the swastika of peace. Yeah, you know what I'm trying to say. So what we do know a lot about Etruscans when we do sort of a much bigger talk about the Etruscans. What we do see about the Etruscans is the fact that they have a habit of creating models of their world, right? And when I say that they're creating models of their world, you can see this chariot here, and one of the world's there you go, Goff. One of the world's greatest archaeological finds ever, right? So you've got this sort of chariot, this bronze chariot, and again, this is telling you about their world without depending upon writing, seeing this, understanding, believing. In many ways, the Etruscans were a bit like people keeping albums and sort of people keeping records and things of people today, right? So we've got a good record of who they were. And look at this. This is they developed the hollow cast bronze method. So you don't have solid bronzes, but you have a hollow cast. And we know this is Etruscan because there's an inscription on the leg. Look at that, So again, this is more later, but they were extremely gifted craftsmen, And when I say the word gifted, you got to the god Texans as a gift. So there we go. Sans was the protectress of childhood within the Etruscan world. What else have we got? Now, when I think last night it was like, all right, yeah, we've got to do a talk on Etruscan sort of their hypogeums and necropoli underground, and we've got to sort of look at their sarcophagi. And it's like my grandparents, underground, so what we know, the hypogeums, the necropoli underground, we know that people visited them. And why? Well, we see things down there, right? We see artifacts down there, right? And evidence of flowers being laid, but that could have been when the the tomb was sealed, but they were never sealed. They were kept open. So what we've got with lots of these hypogeums, these underground places of our loved ones, underneath that would have been a sarcophagi, and the body would have been in it. And on top, this is the carving on the sarcophagi. And you would go down and say, "Look, Grandad, I've met this bloke. What do you think about him?" And there's grandmother going, "Go on, answer it," that type of thing. And then you look at these. I think you two guys know what I'm talking about when we remember people in our past and we think, what would they have done? So you go down with a lantern, with an oil lamp, and you sit there and you talk to your loved ones, and you talk to this sarcophagi, which is this is going to be coloured. It's going to be very lifelike, and you can get those answers right. It's better than carrying a mummified person around with you that some cultures do. This is the Mars. This is the Mars of Todi, right? And look at the detail in that Etruscan bronze. Look at the muscle texture, right? This is bronze work at its best. So anyone says that the Romans developed this bronze work, it's false. This is Etruscan bronze work. And don't forget, Arnold of Todi, right, is the guy in the medieval period that said all Englishmen had tails. Don't forget that. Good answer to a quiz question. But this is a bronze from 400 years BC. They were at it. Now, the Etruscans knew how to do it, like the Chinese were doing it at the same time. But these are the Etruscans. But you see that, when we did the lecture about the legends of the foundation of Rome, Ab Urbe Condita, Romulus and Remus, and the wolf, it's likely that the Romulus and Remus bronze, the Capitoline wolf, is actually Etruscan. And the irony of that, the irony of the story of Romulus and Remus predates Rome, but the Romans just took the idea. So in other words, did Romulus and Remus actually really find Rome? Big question. But the Romans don't want us to know that. This is obviously this is a Roman bronze, this is a Roman bronze, but look at the detail in that. Look at the real detail in that. The ribs showing, the mane there, looking, got these two annoying children drinking milk. It's probably going to be rich milk as well, very rich. And one thing that we've got here, lots of Etruscan towns after the Romans said, bugger off, killed the Etruscans. And the last Etruscan town was eventually non-Etruscan by the Romans in the reign of Octavian Augustus. So what happens is lots of monasteries were built at these places, and some of the walls around there, this wonderful sort of Etruscan ex-city town, are still there. So it's great. And this itself has got to be one of the finest bronzes from antiquity. It's the chimera of Arezzo. And look at that. A chimera is basically a beast within a beast. A mix match where you've got a snake's tail and you've got sort of a reindeer, and you've got a lion there, and look how fine. And the Etruscans made this because there's Etruscan writing on it. So this is the Etruscan world at its best. The Etruscans are more than just a postcard. They're a living embodiment of how we could have done things in the past without killing each other all the time. The Etruscans were a means of understanding history without talking about warfare and Alexander the Great, Adolf Hitler, and everyone that goes out to war against people, right? The Etruscans tell us of a way of civilization like the Phoenicians did that doesn't add up to killing people, right? But unfortunately, there's always people out there who think that they can do better and then steal what you've got and wipe out the wonderful ways of the Etruscan world, which is very, very sad. And I've just got, this is basically, we should go back a bit. So they were good with their pottery. This is the type of thing that you might buy in a gift shop in Cyprus, but this is, the Bacchero cockerel from Viterbo, an Etruscan bottle with writing on it, Etruscan writing on it. Wonderful that, it's just like they're telling us they want us to hear their voices. And then Etruscan text. The Etruscan text look very similar to ours today. The A, the B, the C, the D, the E, the F look very similar to our sort of the first stuff anyway. And then you get the I, the K, the L, the M. So there you go. And then finally, this last image, this itself, the Clepus Parasinus from San Marco. And this dates from somewhere in 200 years BC. And this is basically a document of the world that we see represented everything good about humanity, the Etruscans. So we'll do another presentation about this in 2 weeks, not next week. We'll be doing something completely different next week, Roman based. So we are going to call it a night now. It's 8:54. And again, it's a more quieter one tonight. So we're going to see if there are any questions. Henry's not going to be around for a few weeks, and Pap should be back. And I don't know where Anne is. And we've got the Dodgy Git online. Don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. Right. Anybody want anything that anybody got anything they would like to say?
Are you saying the Etruscans were not warlike at all?
Yeah, the Etruscans had an army, right? They did have soldiers, but they didn't go out doing what the Romans did. They didn't go out conquering Egypt. They didn't go out conquering the Carthaginians. They didn't go out conquering Sicily. They didn't go out destroying the Romans. They didn't do what the Romans did. Yeah, they did have an army. Most, the Swiss have an army, right? But they don't use it, do they? So, not to sound defensive there, I know what you were saying, and I understand what you were saying, but they had soldiers, but they didn't use them for the purposes that the Romans used them for. It's just to keep peace.
I always thought the Etruscans were traders.
Mm. Yes, they were. You need soldiers on boats to protect them from pirates and so on. They did exist in the Mediterranean. Yeah, the Etruscans were traders, but they had soldiers, but they weren't used in the same ways that the Romans used the soldiers. That's basically it,
Okay, yeah, great. Well, it was very good. Lots of nice images. Very, very interesting. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Goff, and thanks for joining us tonight. Before we finish, we got Richard.
Yeah, no, very interesting. Terrific, the bronzes and everything that they amazing, they can make something that's very impressive.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a world that created, like some of those other Central American civilizations, which were very similar to the Etruscans. A little bit more blood there, but the thing is, what we do see with the Etruscans is that there's balance. Okay, a quote from Star Wars: "There's balance in the Force. You don't need to go out doing what the Romans were doing." The Greeks were warlike, Macedonia, Alexander the Great, Sparta, and all the rest of it. But obviously, the Etruscans weren't like that. But the Etruscans were sort of that way, and then you got the Greeks, Carthaginians, and then you've got the Romans, right? In order of violence. Okay, we'll do it another way. Etruscans, Egyptians, Greeks, Carthaginians, Romans, right? So we got them there. So the Etruscans are this end and the Romans are this end. And there's, so this is basically a good analogy of the Etruscan world.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, great.
So what I'm gonna say before we go, Goff, are you going to go and see the Naked Gun film?
Yeah, I might do. Yeah.
Good. Well, I think I'm going to go and see the Naked Gun film as well.
That's with Liam Neeson in, yeah.
Yeah, apparently it is really, really good. It's basically um Leslie Nielsen. It's a homage to him, and they do mention him in the film a lot, and Pamela Anderson is in it, and it's apparently really good.
Okay. Yep. Okie doke.
So yeah, so I'm very pleased as well that I got another piece of work coming up very, very soon. So it's all go. And I'm looking. Do you know what? I'm looking forward to Downton Abbey 3 coming out because it's getting really painful if I'm in it or not.
I'll have to watch out for that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. On that moment, of what will happen? I'll be in the cinema, right, and I'll be with Michelle, and I'll say I'll go off for a break now, right? I'll be for 3 minutes. She said, "My God, you were on the screen," and I'll have missed it. Do you know when I used to go to football matches and I used to like watching Wales play? Every time Wales scored a goal, right, I had gone to the loo. I remember Robert Earnshaw. He scored a goal and we beat Germany in the match. So when we had that game against Russia where we could have qualified for the Euros, I thought I'm going to watch this, and you know what? We lost the game, and it was my fault. On that note, is there anything Richard or Goff wants to say before we go?
No, that's it.
No, I'm done.
Okie
Okay,
doke.
many thanks you two. Thanks for your continued support, Richard and Goff, and I will see you next Tuesday, next Wednesday. Take care.
Bye.
There you go. Bye,
Oh,
Cheers,
everyone.
guys. Night night. Bye bye. Bye
So
bye.
long.
Night.
So
Right.
long.
So long, baby. Night night. Night, Goff. Right, so that's it tonight. So Dodgy Git, thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe. Time for Blackadder then, and also the new Blackadder film series coming out. Hopefully, I don't know how that's going to be, but we'll see. Anyway, Dodgy Git, I'm going to call it a night. I'm going to look in the chat box whilst I wait, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to feed a goat and work out my life for a few minutes. So I'm going to check that out now. And I'm going to look in the chat box. 1, nothing in that window. Nothing in that window. 2, nothing in that window. 3, nothing in that window. 4, nothing in that window. 5, nothing in that window. 6, 7, 8, 9, and nothing in that window. 10. Nostalgia. No night.